Jamal Johnson sat in the back of the classroom, tapping his fingers nervously on his notebook. The air was thick with the hum of murmurs from his classmates, all eager to hear what the guest lecturer from Harvard had to say. He wasn't sure why he was so tense. After all, it was just another lecture, another day of school. But something about this one felt different, like it was going to change everything. Dr. Ashton, the Harvard professor, stepped up to the podium with the quiet confidence of someone who knew their brilliance was undeniable. He was tall, wearing a suit that screamed, "I have arrived," his white hair neatly combed back, and his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Jamal couldn't help but notice how calm and collected he looked. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was the challenge that Dr. Ashton laid out to the class, an impossible problem that no one, not even Harvard's finest minds, had been able to crack. This, Dr. Ashton began, his voice deep and measured, is what we call an unsolvable equation. It's a problem that's baffled scientists for decades, a problem that has stumped the best and brightest. No one has managed to find a solution, until now, at least. Jamal felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He hadn't expected this to be part of the lecture. Everyone was looking at him now, like the room had suddenly gotten smaller, the space between him and the rest of the class widening. He was just a kid, an outsider in this fancy classroom filled with wealthy students who had every advantage in the world. Jamal could feel the pressure mounting, even if no one else could see it. The last thing he wanted was to be singled out. He already knew what they thought of him, someone who didn't belong in this space. Dr. Ashton paused, surveying the room with a self-assured gaze. This problem is impossible. I challenge any one of you to solve it. You're free to try, of course, but just know. No one, not even the brightest minds at Harvard, have been able to crack it. The room went silent. Jamal's heart raced. Impossible? A challenge like that didn't just get thrown around for fun. The professor was daring them, almost daring someone like Jamal, to take up the gauntlet. He could already feel the weight of the words hanging in the air, suffocating him. It was as if the universe had already decided the outcome, failure. But then, something unexpected happened. You hear that, Malik? Jamal whispered to his best friend, who sat beside him. Malik grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Yeah, man, but you know what? I bet you could figure it out. You're smarter than half these guys. Jamal shook his head, the doubt creeping back in. Me? A 12-year-old kid from this school. You saw the professor, Malik. He basically just told us it's impossible. We're not supposed to even try. But Malik wasn't listening. He leaned in closer, his voice low. Don't let him tell you what you can and can't do. That guy. He doesn't know you, Jamal. He doesn't know what you can do when you put your mind to something. Jamal didn't respond right away. The room was still silent, everyone waiting for Dr. Ashton to continue his lecture. But Jamal's mind was racing. Impossible. The word echoed in his head. He had heard it 1,000 times before, at school, at home, in the streets. It was the kind of word that followed him like a shadow. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You'll never amount to anything. But there was something about the way Dr. Ashton had said it that made Jamal's blood boil. What if this time was different? What if he could prove everyone wrong? The professor resumed speaking, his voice carrying a sense of finality. You're free to try, of course. But I won't be holding my breath. This problem has defeated every mind that's come before you. No one has even come close to finding a solution. A wave of skepticism swept through the room, and Jamal could feel the weight of everyone's doubt. His classmates were already dismissing the problem, convinced it was too big to solve. They weren't interested in trying, not really. Jamal, though, was different. He was used to being told no. He was used to being overlooked, underestimated. It was what everyone had done to him his entire life. But there was something inside him, something that stirred when Dr. Ashton had called it impossible. Maybe this time, he thought, maybe he could show them. "You're going to try, aren't you?" Malik whispered, a grin playing on his lips. Jamal nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am." He didn't know why he had said it. Maybe it was because he didn't want to feel like a failure. Maybe it was because, for once, he didn't want to be the kid who backed down. Maybe it was because, in that moment, he realized something that had been buried deep inside him all along: Jamal Johnson was tired of being told what he couldn't do. Dr. Ashton finished his lecture, but Jamal couldn't focus on the rest of the class. His mind was already elsewhere, already racing ahead, formulating a plan, looking for answers that others couldn't see. As the bell rang and the students filed out of the room, Jamal stayed behind, sitting at his desk, staring at the equation on the board. The numbers and symbols blurred in front of his eyes. For a moment, it felt like the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. How could he possibly do this? How could a 12-year-old kid from a poor neighborhood hope to solve a problem that had stumped Harvard professors? But then he remembered what Malik had said. Don't let him tell you what you can and can't do. For the first time in a long while, Jamal didn't feel like the underdog. He didn't feel small or insignificant. He felt something else, something bigger than the doubt or fear that had always followed him. He felt a fire inside him, a determination that burned brighter than any words of doubt. Jamal gathered his things and stood up, his mind set. The challenge was on. He wasn't going to back down this time. As he walked out of the classroom, he whispered to himself, "I'll show them. I'll show them that nothing is impossible." With that, Jamal's journey began. And though he didn't know it yet, it would take him on a path that would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone who ever told him that he couldn't. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jamal Johnson's life had never been easy. Born and raised in a neighborhood where dreams often felt out of reach, he was no stranger to the harsh realities of growing up black in a world that often seemed stacked against him. The neighborhood where he lived, Oakwood, wasn't a place where kids dreamed of going to college or becoming doctors or engineers. It was a place where survival often took precedence over education, where the day-to-day struggle made it hard to imagine a future beyond the blocks that contained him. Yet, somehow, Jamal had always found a way to dream. At 12 years old, he wasn't the best student in the class, but he wasn't the worst either. He was smart, sharp, and, most importantly, he had an insatiable curiosity that made him different from most of his peers. His mom, Dolores Johnson, worked long hours as a nurse at the local hospital. She'd raised him alone after his father had walked out when he was just a baby, and she had always told him the same thing. "Jamal, you're gonna have to work twice as hard as anyone else. But if you keep your head in the books and never give up, you can make it out of here. You can do anything." Those words were what kept Jamal going when everything around him told him it was impossible. He could never forget the long nights when his mom would help him with his homework after an exhausting shift at the hospital. Sometimes, she would be so tired that she would fall asleep sitting at the kitchen table, but Jamal would keep going. He knew she was doing everything she could to make a better life for them, and he couldn't let her down. Jamal's best friend, Malik, was his constant companion, someone who understood him better than anyone. They'd been inseparable since kindergarten. Malik, always the jokester, lightened the mood when Jamal needed it most, but underneath his humor, he had a deep respect for Jamal's determination. While many of their friends played basketball or hung out on the street corners after school, Jamal and Malik would spend hours at the library. Jamal would scour books on science, math, and technology, and Malik would talk about how one day they were going to make it out of Oakwood, maybe start their own tech company or become famous engineers. Jamal never really believed in the second part, but the first part. The part where they left this place. That felt possible. Mrs. Patterson, Jamal's science teacher, was the one who had noticed Jamal's potential. She had been teaching at Oakwood Middle School for over a decade, and while she had seen many students come and go, Jamal stood out. Not because he was always the loudest in class, or because he showed off his grades like some of the other kids did, but because he asked questions. He wanted to know more. And that wasn't something you saw often in Oakwood. "Jamal," Mrs. Patterson had said to him one day after class, "you're something special. You've got a mind that doesn't quit. I think you have potential to go places. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." Jamal had been taken aback by her words. In Oakwood, kids like him were rarely told they were special. Mrs. Patterson's encouragement stuck with him, and that small seed of belief grew. It was the first time someone outside of his family had told him he was capable of more, and it made him want to prove it. Prove that the system wasn't going to define who he was or what he could do. But, despite the encouragement, Jamal still found himself living in two worlds. In the classroom, he was seen as the kid who had potential, but once he walked out the door, the world saw him as just another black kid from the wrong side of the tracks. There were always whispers, always looks, from the other students at his school, the ones with the clean shoes and expensive backpacks. The ones whose parents could afford to send them to summer camps, who didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from. Jamal had learned to block out the stares, but they were there, subtle, like background noise, always reminding him that he didn't quite belong. Still, he pushed through. Every time someone looked down on him or told him what he couldn't do, he used it as fuel. His mom had taught him that the world would never hand him anything, he would have to work for it, fight for it. And that's exactly what he did. But even as Jamal kept pushing, he couldn't ignore the reality of his situation. His neighborhood wasn't a place that nurtured dreams. It was a place where young men were too often swallowed by their circumstances. He had seen his friends slip through the cracks, dropping out of school, getting caught up in the street life, or worse, getting involved in things they would never be able to get out of. Jamal hated the feeling that he was one bad decision away from becoming another statistic. But he wasn't going to be one of them. He couldn't. So, while he may not have had the fancy books or the best technology at his disposal, he had something else, an unbreakable will. When Jamal came home that afternoon, after hearing the impossible challenge from Dr. Ashton, he found his mom sitting at the kitchen table, her face tired but smiling. She always tried to hide the weight of her exhaustion from him, but Jamal knew how hard she worked. The hospital shifts, the late nights, the constant worry that something might go wrong, he saw it all. And he hated it. "Hey, baby, how was school today?" Dolores asked, her voice soft. Jamal sat down across from her, his mind racing. He didn't know how to explain what had happened in class. How do you tell your mom that someone had just told you that the impossible was waiting for you? He could already hear her response, "You can do it. You just need to work harder." But for once, Jamal wasn't sure he could work harder. He was scared. Scared that this time, there would be no way out. Scared that the challenge was bigger than anything he had ever faced. But instead of voicing his fears, Jamal forced a smile. "It was good, Mom. We got this crazy challenge from a Harvard professor today. He thinks it's impossible, but I don't know. I think I can do it." Dolores looked at him, her face softening. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. She just reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You always can," she said. "You've got more inside of you than anyone gives you credit for. Just remember that, Jamal. You're stronger than you know." And in that moment, Jamal felt something shift inside him. He didn't know how he would solve the impossible problem. But he knew one thing for sure, he was going to try. And if there was anyone who could do it, it was him. For the first time, he wasn't just trying to prove something to the world. He was proving it to himself. The days after Dr. Ashton's lecture seemed to stretch on longer than usual. Jamal couldn't focus on anything. His mind was constantly pulled back to that moment in class, where the Harvard professor had called the problem impossible, challenging anyone to crack it. It wasn't just the challenge itself that haunted him, it was the idea that he, a 12-year-old kid from Oakwood, might be the one to prove him wrong. His friends, Malik included, didn't quite understand why Jamal couldn't let it go. To them, it was just another professor with too much confidence in his own intellect, someone who saw the world in black and white terms, either something was solvable or it wasn't. But to Jamal, it was personal. This wasn't just about solving an equation, it was about showing that he was capable of more than anyone had ever believed. More than the world around him ever believed. That night, after dinner, Jamal headed straight to his room. His mom had given him the "you can do it" speech, and though he appreciated it, it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to understand why it was impossible, what made this problem so different from anything else he'd ever seen. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and started his search. It didn't take long for him to realize just how deep the problem ran. The equation Dr. Ashton had written on the board wasn't just a math problem, it was an unsolved challenge that had baffled mathematicians for decades. It was an equation tied to quantum mechanics and string theory, complex subjects that Jamal had only heard of in passing. To most people, it was just some abstract mathematical conundrum, but to Jamal, it represented something more, a way to prove himself. A way to prove that there were no limits. As Jamal dug deeper, his heart raced. Every time he thought he understood something, it slipped away, leaving him with more questions. But he refused to back down. He couldn't. He wasn't just trying to prove something to the people who doubted him. He was trying to prove it to himself, to show that he was capable of more than just surviving in Oakwood. He could thrive. The next day at school, Jamal couldn't sit still. His thoughts were consumed by the problem, even as his classmates were discussing the latest episode of a popular TV show or joking about the upcoming basketball game. Malik, who noticed his friend's distraction, leaned in. "You okay, man? You've been quiet all day." Jamal shook his head, barely hearing Malik's words. "I can't stop thinking about that equation. I need to figure it out. I need to prove it's not impossible." Malik chuckled, though there was a hint of concern in his voice. "Man, you're serious about this, huh? I mean, Harvard professors. That's some big stuff." "I know," Jamal replied, his voice soft but firm. "But that's the thing. He thinks it's impossible. And I think that's just because no one's thought about it the right way." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Okay, I get it. But don't burn yourself out, all right? You're not alone in this. You don't need to take on the world by yourself." Jamal nodded absently. It was true. Malik had always been there for him, the voice of reason, the one who kept him grounded. But this was something Jamal had to do alone. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about cracking an equation. This was about showing the world. And himself, that no challenge was too great. That afternoon, Jamal stayed after school, long after the other students had filed out of the building. He headed to the library, his go-to spot when he needed peace and quiet to think. As he walked through the rows of books, he couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. The library had always been a safe place for him, a place where knowledge wasn't just something you were given, it was something you could take for yourself. He settled into one of the corner tables, surrounded by textbooks and research papers. He pored over everything he could find on quantum mechanics and string theory, trying to make sense of the symbols and equations that seemed completely alien to him. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt something else, something he hadn't expected. Excitement. A rush of curiosity. This was what it felt like to push past your limits, to reach for something bigger than what you could see. For the first time in a long time, Jamal felt like he was where he was supposed to be. Hours passed, and Jamal lost track of time. He wasn't sure when the other students had left, but he was so absorbed in his work that it didn't matter. The more he read, the more he understood. The equation wasn't impossible, it was just never approached in the right way. It was all about perspective. Every scientist who had tried to solve it had used the same methods, the same rules. But Jamal? He had no rules. He wasn't bound by what everyone else had tried before. The next day, as Jamal walked into class, he had a new sense of purpose. His heart pounded in his chest as he entered the room, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation. This was it. The moment when he would show them all. Dr. Ashton was already standing at the front of the room, reviewing the equation once again, just as he had the day before. But this time, Jamal wasn't just going to sit there and listen. This time, he was going to do something about it. As the professor finished his introduction, Jamal stood up, his voice steady but loud enough for the class to hear. "Dr. Ashton," he said, "I think I've got an idea. I think I can solve the equation." There was a moment of stunned silence. The class turned to look at him, surprise written on every face. Even Dr. Ashton raised an eyebrow. "You think so, Jamal?" the professor asked, his tone amused but curious. Jamal nodded. "Yeah. I do." The professor smiled faintly, a look of mild amusement in his eyes. "Well, then. Let's see what you've got." For the first time, Jamal felt the weight of the room's attention on him. But this time, he wasn't scared. He wasn't doubting himself. He had something to prove, not to anyone else, but to himself. He wasn't just going to sit in the back of the classroom anymore. Jamal was stepping into the spotlight. And as the class watched, Jamal began to explain his theory. Slowly, deliberately, he walked them through each step of his approach to the equation. The looks on his classmates' faces shifted from skepticism to intrigue. Even Dr. Ashton seemed to be paying closer attention now, his earlier confidence starting to waver. Jamal wasn't sure where this path would lead. But for the first time in his life, he was sure of one thing: he was on the right track. And that, for Jamal, was enough. The days following Jamal's bold claim in class were filled with a strange mixture of excitement and fear. He was both exhilarated and terrified by the weight of what he had just set in motion. The equation was still a giant puzzle in his mind, and as much as he had mapped out a path forward, he knew it was going to take everything he had, everything he'd ever learned, to figure it out. Every day after school, Jamal would return to the library, diving deeper into quantum mechanics, string theory, and mathematical principles that seemed so far beyond his understanding. There were moments when he felt like he was drowning in a sea of symbols, equations, and complex theories, but he pushed through. When the complexity of it all began to feel suffocating, he would stop for a moment, take a deep breath, and remember the fire inside him. That fire, fueled by the desire to prove everyone wrong, kept him going. It was in the library where he met someone who would become an unlikely ally. Her name was Claire Patterson, and she was the daughter of Mrs. Patterson, his science teacher. Claire was a freshman at a nearby high school, attending a prestigious science academy, and had been visiting the Oakwood Library to work on a project. Jamal first noticed her when she sat at a nearby table, working diligently on some sort of scientific research paper. They hadn't spoken before, but Jamal had seen her around school, usually hanging out in the science club, surrounded by older students, and always carrying a pile of textbooks that seemed way too advanced for a girl her age. At first, Jamal didn't want to bother her. He was in his own world, trying to make sense of everything that Dr. Ashton had thrown at him. But one afternoon, as Jamal was hunched over a set of equations, Claire's voice broke through his concentration. "You know," she said, her tone light but full of curiosity, "you look like you're trying to do something that's way above your level." Jamal didn't look up, but his mind registered the comment. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone younger than him. But instead of brushing her off, he decided to take a chance. He glanced at her, a little annoyed but mostly intrigued. "I'm trying to solve the impossible equation," he said, matter-of-factly. Claire raised an eyebrow, clearly interested. "The one that Dr. Ashton talked about? The one he said no one could solve?" Jamal nodded, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie in her question. Yeah, that one. I think I've figured out a way to solve it, but I don't know. It's complicated. Claire pushed her books aside and sat up straighter, her eyes lighting up with a mix of excitement and confidence. Well, I happen to know a thing or two about complicated math. What's your approach? Jamal hesitated for a second, unsure of how much he should share. He wasn't used to talking about his ideas with others, especially someone who hadn't grown up in his world. But there was something about Claire's demeanor, something about her easy confidence, that made him open up. He explained the key points of his theory, outlining the approach he had developed to solve the equation. To his surprise, Claire didn't dismiss his ideas. Instead, she listened intently, nodding as he spoke. That's actually pretty smart, she said, after a pause. But I think you're missing one key element. There's a specific concept from string theory that could really change how you're looking at this. It's a bit complicated, but if you can get your head around it, it could open up a whole new way of solving the problem. Jamal's eyes widened. You think so? Claire smiled, her confidence shining through. Absolutely. If you're serious about this, I can help you out. I've got some notes from the advanced classes I've taken. We can work through it together. Jamal's mind was racing. This was the help he needed. Claire was one of the few people who could understand what he was trying to do, and her knowledge of string theory could be the key that unlocked the door he'd been trying to open. For the next few days, Jamal and Claire became a team. Every afternoon after school, they met in the library to work through the problem. Jamal still felt like he was on unfamiliar ground, but with Claire's guidance, he began to see the equation in a new light. It was like the pieces of a puzzle he'd been staring at for weeks were finally starting to fall into place. Claire's ability to explain complex ideas in a simple, relatable way was invaluable to Jamal, and she quickly became the missing link he had been searching for. Still, Jamal was aware of how much work was left to do. There were moments when he felt like quitting, when the problem seemed too big, too complicated, or when he felt the heavy weight of doubt creeping in. But every time he thought about giving up, he thought about his mom. He thought about the long nights she'd stayed up to help him with his homework, the sacrifices she'd made to give him a shot at something better. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't let himself down. As Jamal and Claire worked through the theory, the day of the final presentation to Dr. Ashton grew closer. The pressure was mounting. Jamal had never been more focused in his life, but the thought of standing in front of the Harvard professor, the one who had deemed the problem impossible, sent a ripple of anxiety through him. What if he was wrong? What if he couldn't prove it? What if all this work, this sacrifice, was for nothing? But then Jamal thought back to that first day when he had stood up in class and declared that he could do it. He had made a promise to himself, and there was no turning back now. He wasn't going to let fear stop him from trying. He wasn't going to let anyone, Dr. Ashton or anyone else, define what he could or couldn't do. With a deep breath, Jamal stood up from the library table. Claire looked up at him, a smile of encouragement on her face. "You've got this," she said. Jamal nodded. "Yeah. I think I do." And with that, he gathered his notes and his courage, ready to face whatever came next. Because Jamal knew one thing for sure, this was his moment. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. The day of the presentation arrived with a heaviness in the air, like the weight of the world had settled on Jamal's shoulders. His palms were sweaty as he walked into class, his mind racing. The room was buzzing with the murmurs of his classmates, who had no idea what was about to unfold. They were all still talking about the lecture Dr. Ashton had given, dismissing the equation as impossible, and laughing it off like it was just another intellectual challenge that would never be solved. But Jamal wasn't laughing. He wasn't here for jokes. He was here to prove something. When Jamal entered the classroom, Dr. Ashton was standing at the front, looking as composed as ever. He was flipping through some notes, seemingly unaware of the storm that was brewing in Jamal's mind. But as Jamal walked in, the professor looked up, his piercing eyes scanning him for a moment before breaking into a faint smile. "So, Jamal, I see you've decided to give this a try after all. How courageous." Jamal could feel the professor's words hanging in the air like a challenge. It wasn't an outright dismissal, but there was a thin layer of doubt in Dr. Ashton's voice. Jamal straightened his back, the weight of the moment finally sinking in. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change, for better or for worse. He walked to the front of the class, his heart pounding in his chest. The board was already clean, ready for him to write out his solution. Claire had been right beside him every step of the way in the last few weeks, guiding him through the theories, showing him how to work through the complex strings of quantum mechanics and string theory. Now it was Jamal's turn to stand on his own. As he picked up the marker, he could feel his nerves threatening to overtake him. But then he thought about the countless hours he'd spent, the late nights, the books stacked high in the library, the way Claire had patiently explained the theories to him over and over again. He wasn't just going to let all that effort go to waste. He couldn't. Taking a deep breath, Jamal started writing the first part of his solution on the board. He could hear the rustle of paper and the shuffle of feet behind him as his classmates settled into their seats, watching intently. Dr. Ashton's eyes were fixed on him, unreadable, like a judge observing a defendant before delivering a verdict. Jamal continued to write, focusing on the theory behind the equation. He talked through the first few steps, explaining how the problem could be broken down into simpler components. He demonstrated how quantum mechanics, when viewed from the perspective of uncertainty, could offer new insights. Then, he introduced the idea that had been his breakthrough, how string theory could be integrated to offer a solution to the equation's inherent paradoxes. As Jamal spoke, his nerves began to ease. The more he explained, the more confident he became in his understanding of the problem. He could see the faces of his classmates, some of them nodding along, others furrowing their brows in concentration. Even Dr. Ashton, who had been skeptical at first, was leaning forward in his chair, his eyes narrowed as if trying to find fault in Jamal's reasoning. Jamal could feel the heat of Dr. Ashton's gaze, but instead of feeling intimidated, he felt empowered. This wasn't just about solving a math problem. This was about proving that a kid like him, from a neighborhood like Oakwood, could do something extraordinary. It was about showing that anyone, regardless of where they came from or what others believed about them, could change the world if they just put their mind to it. Finally, Jamal reached the conclusion of his solution. He turned to the class, ready to explain the final steps. The room was silent, everyone waiting for him to either succeed or fail. He could almost hear his heart pounding in his ears. "This," Jamal said, his voice steady, "is the breakthrough." The equation, when reinterpreted with this approach, allows for a new perspective on string theory that no one has considered before. The seeming paradox disappears when you apply this model. He stepped back from the board and looked at Dr. Ashton, waiting for the verdict. The professor stood up slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The room held its breath as Dr. Ashton paced in front of the board, his mind clearly working through the solution Jamal had just presented. The tension was thick, suffocating. Jamal's stomach twisted in knots as he watched Dr. Ashton. What if he was wrong? What if all of this effort had been for nothing? Finally, Dr. Ashton stopped pacing and turned to face the class. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He gave a small nod and addressed the room. "Well," he began, his voice measured, "I must admit, Jamal, I was not expecting this." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "This approach is unorthodox. And, to be honest, I need more time to fully evaluate its implications. However, I will say this, it's not wrong. In fact, it might just open up new avenues for exploration that we have yet to consider." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. The class was silent for a moment, processing the weight of the professor's words. Then, the silence broke. There were a few murmurs of surprise, and some of his classmates exchanged glances as if trying to digest the fact that the impossible equation might have just been cracked by a 12-year-old kid. Dr. Ashton's gaze shifted back to Jamal. "You've certainly earned my respect, Jamal. This solution is not the final word on the matter, but it's a valid one. And it deserves further attention. You've proven that the boundaries of what's possible are not as clear-cut as we often think." Jamal could hardly believe what he was hearing. The professor, Dr. Ashton, the very man who had declared the problem impossible, had just admitted that Jamal's solution had merit. Jamal felt a rush of pride, but it was tempered by the realization that this was only the beginning. There were still so many unknowns, so many challenges ahead. But for the first time, Jamal knew that he was on the right path. He had done it. He had shown that impossible didn't exist, not if you were willing to challenge it. As Jamal walked back to his seat, Claire flashed him a wide grin, and Malik gave him a thumbs up from the back of the room. For a brief moment, Jamal allowed himself to bask in the accomplishment. But he knew deep down that this was just one step. The real journey was only beginning. And with that, Jamal sat down, ready for whatever came next. Because if he had learned anything over the past few weeks, it was this: nothing, no matter how impossible, could ever hold him back again. In the days that followed the presentation, the buzz around Jamal's solution spread like wildfire. What had started as a solitary effort in the quiet confines of the library was now the talk of the entire school. Everyone seemed to be waiting for Dr. Ashton's official verdict, but no one expected the professor to announce what he did the next morning. Jamal walked into class with a sense of cautious optimism. He had done something he never thought possible: he had stood up to the odds, cracked the code, and solved the impossible equation. But the reality of what was to come was still sinking in. When the bell rang, signaling the start of class, Dr. Ashton entered the room with an air of anticipation. There was something different in his demeanor, something that suggested he had more to say. Jamal felt his palms grow sweaty as he stood at his desk, waiting for what would come next. Would the professor dismiss it as just a fluke? Would he call it an accident or some kind of mistake? But instead, Dr. Ashton did something that no one in the class expected. "I've had a lot of time to think about Jamal's solution," he began, his voice measured, yet full of respect. "And after careful consideration, I've come to a conclusion: I was wrong." He paused, letting the weight of those words hang in the air. "I declared this problem impossible, but Jamal has shown that the impossible is just a matter of perspective. What seemed like an insurmountable challenge was, in fact, a breakthrough in its own right." Jamal felt a lump rise in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of praise, not from someone like Dr. Ashton. The professor wasn't known for being warm or lenient. In fact, he was famous for his strict standards and his inability to be impressed by anything less than perfection. But here he was, standing in front of the class, acknowledging that Jamal had done what no one thought was possible. Dr. Ashton turned to the whiteboard and pointed to the equation Jamal had solved, the one that had once been declared unsolvable. What Jamal did here, he continued, wasn't just solving an equation. It was about approaching the problem from a completely new angle, challenging everything we thought we knew. This solution could open doors to new theories in quantum mechanics and string theory that we haven't even begun to explore. The room was silent, the weight of Dr. Ashton's words sinking in. Jamal could hardly believe it. He'd done it. Not only had he cracked the code, but now, his solution was being acknowledged by one of the most respected minds in science. But then Dr. Ashton's tone shifted slightly. "That being said," he added, his voice taking on a more serious note, "we need to remember that this solution, while groundbreaking, is still a work in progress. It's not the final answer. It's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. But it's a piece that could change everything we thought we knew about the universe." Jamal nodded, understanding the weight of the professor's caution. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. After the class ended, Jamal found himself surrounded by his classmates. Some were congratulating him, others were still in disbelief, as if they couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened. Malik, who had been silently rooting for Jamal from the back of the room, clapped him on the shoulder as they walked out of the classroom. "Man, you did it," Malik said, his voice filled with admiration. "You really did it." Jamal smiled, but it was a small smile, tempered by the knowledge that the hard work was far from over. "I couldn't have done it without Claire," he said, glancing toward the hallway where Claire was talking to a teacher. Malik raised an eyebrow. "The girl from the library?" Jamal nodded. "Yeah. She's a genius. I just helped put the pieces together. She taught me some things I didn't even know were possible." "Well, she's got a good teacher then," Malik said with a grin. "But seriously, man, you're a legend now. Dr. Ashton doesn't admit when he's wrong. That's a big deal." Jamal just shrugged. "It's only the beginning." As Jamal made his way to his locker, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride, yes, but also a sense of unease. He had proven the impossible could be done, but the implications of that achievement were starting to sink in. What did this mean for his future? What would happen now that he had broken through this barrier? He had gone from being the quiet kid who struggled with the simplest math problems to someone who had defied the odds in front of the most prestigious minds. And while that was an achievement in itself, it came with a lot of pressure. The world was watching now, whether he was ready or not. Later that day, Jamal found himself in the library again, this time with Claire. They were sitting at one of the tables, surrounded by textbooks, papers, and scribbled notes. Despite the attention and the praise from his classmates, Jamal still felt like there was so much left to do. Claire was busy writing down some notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Hey, Jamal," she said, glancing up at him for a moment, "I've been thinking. You know that solution we worked on? I think we need to take it a step further. If we could prove the equation is applicable on a larger scale, say, in predicting gravitational waves or black hole behavior, this could really change the way we think about space and time." Jamal nodded, processing the idea. It was a challenge, but one that felt right. They had already cracked the code, but there was still so much more to explore, so much more to understand. This wasn't the end. It was just another puzzle to solve, one that could take them to places no one had dared to go before. "Let's do it," Jamal said, determination returning to his voice. "Let's see where this can take us." And as they sat there, surrounded by the endless possibilities of the universe, Jamal knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The impossible equation had been solved, but the real adventure was just starting. And he wasn't about to let it slip away. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of discovery, pressure, and sleepless nights. Jamal found himself at the center of a storm that he never expected. Dr. Ashton, the very man who had once dismissed him, had now become his biggest advocate. Word of Jamal's solution to the impossible equation had spread far beyond their school. Emails, phone calls, and even interviews started pouring in. Scientists from across the world were reaching out to him, offering to collaborate, to study the implications of his solution. And it was all happening so fast that Jamal could hardly keep up. At first, it was exciting. The attention, the recognition, it was all so new to him. He had spent his life as an overlooked kid, a kid from a neighborhood where success stories were rare. But now, Jamal was being treated like someone who had the potential to change the course of history. He was no longer just the boy from Oakwood. He was Jamal Harper, the kid who solved the impossible. But as the days went on, the weight of it all began to settle in. The pressure, the expectations, the never-ending questions from reporters, it was becoming overwhelming. It was like the world was watching him, waiting for him to stumble. One afternoon, as Jamal sat in the library with Claire, trying to focus on the next steps in their research, his phone buzzed. It was another email from a major scientific journal, asking for an interview. He stared at the screen, his heart sinking. "Jamal, you okay?" Claire's voice broke through his thoughts. She was sitting across from him, her pencil in hand, but she was looking at him with concern. "I'm fine," Jamal muttered, locking his phone and putting it in his pocket. It's a lot. I didn't think it would be like this." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like, everything is happening so fast," Jamal admitted. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. What if I mess up? What if this is just some fluke and I don't have what it takes to actually make a real impact?" Claire leaned forward, her eyes softening. "Jamal, you've already done something that most people can't even dream of. You've proven that the impossible is just something we haven't figured out yet. You've changed the conversation about what's possible, and that's huge. You don't have to solve everything all at once." "I know, but it feels like the pressure is never going to stop. Everyone expects me to be the next big thing, but I'm still just a kid. A kid who's lucky enough to have stumbled onto something big." Claire smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "I get it. But you're not alone in this. You've got me. And you've got people who believe in you, even if you don't always see it. And I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together, okay?" Jamal nodded, feeling the weight on his shoulders lift just a little. Claire had a way of making everything seem more manageable, as if nothing was truly impossible as long as they were in it together. The next day, Jamal was sitting in the professor's office again. Dr. Ashton had invited him to meet to discuss their next steps in applying his solution to real-world problems. Jamal was both excited and nervous. There was so much potential in what they had uncovered, but the pressure to live up to everyone's expectations was starting to feel suffocating. "Jamal," Dr. Ashton began, his voice calm but serious, "I've been going over your work. And I have to say, I'm impressed. You've done something here that no one else has been able to do. The implications of your solution are vast, and it's only a matter of time before we start seeing how it fits into the larger framework of physics. But, there's a catch." Jamal looked at the professor, trying to steady his breath. "A catch? What do you mean?" Dr. Ashton leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. "The catch is that while your solution is groundbreaking, it's also unconventional. It challenges a lot of long-held beliefs in the scientific community. And that's where the resistance will come in." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. "Resistance? You mean people won't accept it?" "I'm not saying they won't, but you need to understand something," Dr. Ashton continued. "Science doesn't like to be challenged. It doesn't like its foundations to be shaken. And your solution, well, it shakes them. That means you'll have critics, people who'll try to tear your work apart. Some will say you've made mistakes. Others will question your methods. It's just part of the process." Jamal nodded, swallowing hard. He had expected some pushback, but hearing it from Dr. Ashton, someone who had once been skeptical of him, made it all the more real. "Don't let that discourage you," Dr. Ashton said, his voice softer now. "You've proven that the impossible can be achieved. And that alone is something no one can take away from you." Jamal stood up, his mind swirling with the professor's words. He had been prepared for some resistance, but hearing it so plainly made him realize just how much he had yet to overcome. This wasn't just about cracking an equation. It was about changing the way the world thought about science, and that wasn't going to be easy. Later that night, Jamal lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Claire had sent him a message, reminding him to keep his head up, to not let the pressure get to him. But the doubts lingered. He had come so far, but was he really ready for the challenges ahead? He thought about Oakwood, about where he came from. His mom, who had worked so hard to make sure he had the opportunity to chase his dreams. His little brother, who looked up to him like he was already a hero. And the neighborhood, so many people, so many kids, who would never have a chance like he did. He couldn't let them down. He couldn't be just another kid who got lost in the hype. He had to keep moving forward, no matter the odds. Jamal sat up in bed, determination replacing the doubt in his chest. The world might be watching, and the pressure might be overwhelming, but there was no turning back now. He had already shown that he could do what no one else believed was possible. And that was just the beginning. He reached for his phone, sending a quick message to Claire, "Let's get back to work tomorrow. There's still so much more to do." As the screen lit up with Claire's quick reply, Jamal couldn't help but smile. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he knew he was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks flew by in a blur of research, deadlines, and constant scrutiny. Jamal had never imagined that solving an impossible equation would catapult him into such a whirlwind. The pressure to prove that his work wasn't just a fluke was enormous, and every step forward seemed to come with 2 steps back. Despite the excitement surrounding his discovery, doubts began to creep in. Dr. Ashton had warned him that resistance was inevitable, but Jamal hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of the challenge. As the weeks passed, he began to realize just how deeply entrenched the scientific community's ideas were, and how much harder it would be to change them. It wasn't just the professors at the university, it was the entire field. Jamal's solution was threatening to overturn decades of established theory, and no one in the scientific community liked being wrong. The first whispers of skepticism had already started to rise, especially from Dr. Ashton's colleagues. They were cautious, polite on the surface, but beneath it, Jamal could sense their skepticism, even hostility. On a Thursday afternoon, as Jamal sat in the library with Claire, buried in textbooks and notes, the door to their quiet corner opened with a soft creak. Jamal looked up to see Malik walking in, a concerned expression on his face. "Yo, Jamal, you got a minute?" Malik's voice was low, almost hesitant. Jamal glanced at Claire, who gave him an encouraging nod before returning to her own notes. "Yeah, what's up?" Malik sat down across from him, looking around to make sure no one was paying attention. "I got some news," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "People are talking. Some of the professors, man, they're starting to say your solution was just a fluke. They think it doesn't hold up, and I heard a couple of them are going to try to disprove it publicly." Jamal's stomach sank. He had known this day would come, but hearing it out loud made it real. "Who?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Don't know names yet, but I heard Dr. Ashton's colleague, Dr. Halstead, is one of the big critics. He's been pushing against the solution since the beginning, and now he's gathering support." Jamal's fists clenched. Dar. Halstead had been one of the professors who initially doubted him, but he had hoped the support from Dr. Ashton would shield him from this kind of backlash. Apparently, that wasn't going to be the case. Malik continued, "Look, I know this sucks, but don't let it get to you. You did something incredible. But you also need to be ready for this fight. You're going up against some heavyweights here." Jamal nodded, but his mind was racing. He could already feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on him. This wasn't just about solving equations anymore. This was about defending everything he had worked for, every hour spent poring over those impossible numbers. "Thanks, Malik," Jamal said quietly, trying to hold it together. "I'll figure it out." Later that day, Jamal met with Dr. Ashton. The professor's office was colder than usual, a sign that something was off. Dr. Ashton looked at him over the rim of his glasses, his expression unreadable. "Jamal, I've heard the rumors," Dr. Ashton said bluntly. "And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are people in the department who aren't happy with your work. They feel threatened by it, and it's starting to spill over into public discussions." Jamal's stomach twisted, but he forced himself to meet the professor's gaze. "I knew it was coming. I just didn't think it would be like this." Dr. Ashton sighed. "This is the price of innovation, Jamal. When you challenge the status quo, you open the door for criticism. You have to be prepared for this. But let me be clear, I still believe in your work. Your solution is solid. It's groundbreaking. I'm standing by it." Jamal's heart lifted slightly, but the doubts still gnawed at him. What do I do now? How do I defend it when they're going to attack me from all sides? Dr. Ashton leaned forward, his voice steady but urgent. You fight back with the truth. You present your work, step by step. You show them the math, the logic, the reasoning behind it. And most importantly, you do it with confidence. You've already proven you have the mind to solve this. Now, prove that you have the resilience to defend it. The words felt like a challenge, and Jamal knew they were true. He couldn't back down now. He had already shown the world that the impossible could be done. He couldn't let that slip away. Over the next few days, Jamal's life became a blur of preparation. He spent hours in the library, reviewing every detail of his solution. He rechecked every calculation, double-checked the logic, and practiced his arguments over and over again. Claire was there every step of the way, offering support, helping him refine his presentation, and reminding him that he was not alone in this fight. But the tension was palpable. Jamal could feel the weight of the scientific community bearing down on him. At school, whispers followed him in the halls. People who had once praised him were now questioning his methods. There was a sense of unease that seemed to follow him everywhere. Finally, the day came. The university had organized a public debate, a chance for Jamal to present his solution to the critics and defend his work in front of a panel of experts. Dr. Ashton would be there to support him, but it was clear that the real battle would be between Jamal and the critics who were eager to tear his work apart. Jamal stood backstage, nervously adjusting his tie. He could hear the buzz of the crowd on the other side of the curtain, and his heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. Claire stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. You've got this, she said quietly, offering him a reassuring smile. Just remember, you're not doing this alone. You've already won so much. You just have to keep believing in yourself. Jamal nodded, taking a deep breath. Thanks, Claire. I wouldn't have made it this far without you. The doors to the stage opened, and Jamal stepped into the spotlight. The audience fell silent as he walked to the podium, his mind racing. This was it. He had solved the impossible equation. And now, he had to prove that he was ready for whatever came next. As he began to speak, the weight of the world on his shoulders, Jamal realized something. The fight for recognition was never going to be easy. But it was his fight. And no matter how hard the road ahead seemed, he was ready to walk it. This was the challenge he had been waiting for. And it was a challenge he would not back down from. The atmosphere in the auditorium was thick with tension. Jamal could feel the eyes of every professor, every critic, and every student who had come to witness this pivotal moment. The air was charged with an electric kind of anticipation, the kind that came before a storm. Jamal took a steadying breath, gripping the edge of the podium as he looked out at the audience. His palms were clammy, but his mind was sharp. This was his moment. He glanced over at the panel of experts, all of whom had been skeptical of his work. Dr. Halstead sat in the center, his expression one of quiet contempt, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. Jamal's stomach tightened, but he focused on the task at hand. This was more than just defending an equation, it was about proving that his breakthrough was legitimate and real, and that it could not be dismissed simply because it challenged established beliefs. Good afternoon, Jamal's voice echoed through the microphone. It wasn't perfect, his voice wavered just a bit, but it was strong enough. My name is Jamal Harper, and today, I'm here to present the solution to the problem that no one thought could be solved. The impossible equation that has baffled physicists for decades. The audience sat in rapt silence. Jamal could feel the weight of their skepticism, but he ignored it. This wasn't about them. It was about the truth. He took another deep breath and continued. My solution is based on a fundamental shift in how we approach the mathematics behind this equation. It isn't simply a matter of manipulating numbers. It's about understanding the underlying relationships between variables in a way that hasn't been explored before. And when I first came up with the answer, I knew it was something that could change everything. But I also knew that there would be pushback. I'm not naive. I understand that. There was a subtle ripple in the crowd, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Jamal pressed on, his voice growing more confident as he spoke. I'm not here to prove that I'm better than anyone, or that my solution is infallible. What I'm here to do is show that the boundaries of what we think is possible are only as narrow as we make them. We've been operating under the assumption that this equation couldn't be solved. But what if that assumption was wrong? He clicked a button on his laptop, and the screen behind him lit up with a diagram, a complex series of mathematical notations that highlighted the breakthrough he had made. He saw a few raised eyebrows as the audience took in the intricate details. Even Dr. Halstead, who had been scowling at the start, seemed to be paying closer attention. Jamal pointed to the screen. This solution doesn't just offer an answer, it opens up new pathways for research. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond the boundaries of this equation. This could be a stepping stone for solving other complex problems that have remained unsolved for years. But it all begins with challenging the assumption that something is impossible. The panelists were silent, and for a moment, Jamal felt a strange sense of clarity wash over him. He had come here not to convince everyone in the room, but to show them that his solution was worth considering, that it had the potential to spark something bigger. Whether they believed it now or not, the truth would eventually win out. And then came the questions. Dr. Halstead stood up, his voice cold and calculated. Mr. Harper, while your enthusiasm is commendable, your solution lacks a certain rigor. You're asking us to take your word for it without providing the necessary proof for why your approach works. You've presented your answer, but you haven't demonstrated how it fits within the broader framework of established science. How do you respond to that? Jamal's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment he had been waiting for, his first real test. He knew the answer had to be precise, and he needed to be confident in his response. Dr. Halstead, Jamal began, his voice calm, I understand your concerns. And I'm not asking anyone to take my word for it. That's why I've included the detailed steps of my solution in the paper I submitted. It's all laid out, step by step, with clear reasoning behind each calculation. But science isn't static. It evolves. When new ideas are introduced, they're often met with resistance. The real question is, are we willing to consider the possibility that we've been looking at the problem the wrong way? There was a pause, and Jamal could see the slightest flicker of uncertainty in Dr. Halstead's eyes. It was just a flash, but it was enough to make Jamal feel like he had struck a nerve. He couldn't back down now. Another professor, Dr. Williams, who had been quiet up until this point, spoke up. What about the criticism that your approach is too unorthodox? Many feel that your solution, while intriguing, doesn't adhere to the established methods we use in these kinds of problems. Why should we embrace something that deviates so far from the norm? Jamal nodded, recognizing the question as a challenge to his very method of thinking. He had prepared for this. The problem with sticking too rigidly to established methods is that it can limit progress. If we only work within the constraints of what has already been proven, we may miss the breakthroughs that can change everything. I'm not suggesting that we abandon the established methods. But sometimes, the key to solving a problem lies in thinking beyond those constraints. In this case, it was the willingness to entertain an unconventional approach that allowed me to reach a solution that others thought was impossible. The room was quiet for a moment, and Jamal could feel the weight of their stares. But instead of crumbling under the pressure, he felt a sense of purpose solidify within him. He had faced their doubts head-on, and he had answered them with the conviction of someone who knew that he was on the right path. And then, finally, it was Dr. Ashton's turn to speak. He stood up slowly, his hands resting on the table in front of him. His voice was measured, but firm. I've been following Jamal's work closely, Dr. Ashton began. And I can say without hesitation that his solution deserves to be taken seriously. The challenge that we face as scientists is not to cling to our beliefs, but to question them when new evidence arises. Mr. Harper's work may challenge our assumptions, but it does not invalidate the foundation upon which science is built. It invites us to rethink, to innovate, and to push the boundaries of what we know. The room fell silent. Jamal's heart was pounding in his chest as he absorbed the weight of Dr. Ashton's words. For the first time since this debate had begun, he felt like the tide might be turning in his favor. The panelists exchanged looks, some nodding thoughtfully, others still skeptical. But Jamal could see the cracks in their resistance. He had made his case. And though the battle was far from over, Jamal knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. As the debate drew to a close and the audience began to file out, Jamal felt the familiar weight of uncertainty lift. No, not everyone would be convinced today. But he had done what he came here to do. He had shown that the impossible wasn't as out of reach as they thought. And maybe, just maybe, he had earned the chance to prove them all wrong. The debate was over, but Jamal's mind raced on. As he walked out of the auditorium, he was surrounded by a hum of voices, the buzz of a crowd that had witnessed something extraordinary, something that no one had expected. But for Jamal, it didn't feel like a victory just yet. The questions, the doubts, and the skeptics were still there, lingering in the air like a storm waiting to break. He didn't know what the fallout would be, whether this was just a brief flare of recognition, or the beginning of a long, uphill battle. But one thing was certain: he had stepped into the lion's den. The real challenge had only just begun. Jamal's phone buzzed in his pocket as he exited the building, the screen lighting up with a message from Claire. "You did great, Jamal. I'm so proud of you. Let's talk later tonight. I'm sure they'll start reaching out soon. Keep your head up." He smiled at her message. It was exactly the encouragement he needed. He had been so caught up in the nerves and pressure of the moment that he had almost forgotten how far he had come. His friends, his professors, especially Dr. Ashton, had been there for him every step of the way. He was far from alone in this fight. But the nagging voice of doubt still gnawed at him. Would the world accept his work? Would the panelists, Dr. Halstead in particular, be able to look beyond their egos and see the brilliance of what he had uncovered? Or would they continue to dismiss him as a young upstart, too bold for his own good? Jamal made his way to the campus cafe, hoping to get a coffee and clear his head. As he entered, he saw a small group of students gathered near the counter, whispering among themselves. When they saw him, their conversations quieted, and several of them glanced over with raised eyebrows. Some looked impressed, others skeptical. He could feel their eyes on him as he walked past. It was as if they were waiting for him to either falter or rise. They had all seen the same debate, the same questions, and now they wanted to know, would Jamal stand his ground, or would he crumble under the weight of the criticism? He ordered his coffee and sat down in a corner booth, trying to ignore the weight of the world pressing in on him. But no matter how much he tried to focus on his notes, his thoughts kept drifting back to the debate. Had he really convinced anyone? Was Dr. Halstead's dismissal going to carry more weight than Dr. Ashton's support? Suddenly, his phone buzzed again. He took it out and saw a new message, this time from Dr. Ashton. "Jamal, great job today. I know it wasn't easy, but you held your own. I'm meeting with some colleagues to discuss your presentation. Be ready for more feedback, but know this: what you did today was no small feat. Keep pushing." A surge of relief washed over him. Dar. Ashton believed in him. That mattered more than anything. But as he sat there, sipping his coffee, he realized that the next step was the hardest one. The debate had been the first hurdle. But there were still papers to be published, reviews to be written, and critics to face. The true test would come when the scientific community, far beyond the university, had the chance to weigh in. As Jamal headed back to his dorm that evening, his thoughts were still in turmoil. What came next? How would this play out? He knew that he had to stay focused on the work itself. It wasn't about winning popularity contests or silencing the critics, it was about proving that his solution had merit, that it was not just a fluke but a legitimate breakthrough. If he could do that, everything else would fall into place. As he unlocked his door and stepped inside, he saw that the room was empty. Claire was still studying. He plopped down on his bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to gather his thoughts. Just then, there was a knock at the door. It was Malik. "Yo, Jamal, you good?" Malik asked, stepping inside. "Yeah, just thinking," Jamal said, rubbing his face with his hands. "I can't stop wondering if it's enough. What if they just keep tearing it apart?" Malik sat down on the edge of the bed. "Look, man, I get it. But you did what you had to do today. You got up there, you made your case, and you didn't back down. You stood tall in front of some of the biggest names in the field. That's huge. No matter how it plays out, they can't take that away from you." Jamal's mind buzzed with Malik's words, but it didn't make the uncertainty go away. He couldn't stop wondering whether he had really made a lasting impact, whether the critics would find something to undermine his work. His mind raced with the possibility of failure. "Yeah, I guess. I just don't want it to feel like all of this was for nothing," Jamal admitted. "I worked so hard to get here, and now that I've got their attention, I don't know if I can hold it." Malik shrugged. "Man, you already proved something today. You've got the skills. You've got the knowledge. You've got the drive. Now, it's about staying focused and doing the work. You can't control how everyone's gonna react, but you can control your next move." Jamal nodded slowly, taking in Malik's words. "You're right. I can't waste time worrying about what might happen. I just have to keep pushing forward." The following weeks were a blur of activity. Jamal spent his days poring over feedback from the debate, reworking sections of his solution to address concerns raised by the critics. He worked late into the night, his determination stronger than ever. Claire, Malik, and Dr. Ashton all played a crucial role in keeping him grounded, offering advice and encouragement when he needed it most. Then, one afternoon, as Jamal was walking across campus, he received an unexpected email. He opened it eagerly, and his eyes scanned the message. It was from a well-known scientific journal. They wanted to publish his solution. The headline of the email read, "Groundbreaking new solution to the impossible equation, a step toward a new era in mathematical physics." Jamal's heart stopped for a moment. This was it. The validation he had been waiting for. His solution was no longer just a debate, it was becoming part of the scientific record. As he sat down on a bench, staring at the email, Jamal realized that the journey was far from over. There would be more obstacles, more critics, and more long nights of work. But at that moment, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had made it. And there was no turning back now. The impossible equation was no longer just a theory, it was a reality. And Jamal Harper had proven that sometimes, the impossible is only waiting for someone brave enough to solve it. Jamal sat in his cramped dorm room, his laptop screen glowing in front of him. He had just received confirmation from the scientific journal that they were going to publish his paper. His heart still raced, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was the validation he had worked so hard for. The culmination of sleepless nights, of hours spent analyzing equations, of endless hours spent battling doubt. Yet, as he sat there, staring at the confirmation email, a new feeling began to settle in, pressure. The room around him seemed to grow smaller, the weight of the world pressing in from all sides. He had proven himself to his professors, to the panel at the debate, and now to the world through the journal. But now the real challenge began. The expectations would only grow. He would need to defend his solution against the scrutiny of scientists across the globe, and the more visibility his work gained, the more critics would come out of the woodwork. His phone buzzed again, breaking his thoughts. It was a text from Claire. "Jamal, this is huge. Just got the confirmation from Dr. Ashton. You've made it to the journal. I'm so proud of you, but I know this is just the beginning. You're going to need to stay strong and focused. Jamal smiled at her words. Claire had been his rock throughout this entire process, keeping him grounded when everything felt like it might fall apart. He quickly typed back. Thanks, Claire. I know. But I can't help feeling like I'm standing on the edge of something huge. What if I mess it all up now? There was a pause before Claire's reply came through. You're not alone in this, Jamal. You've already done the hard part. And you've proven you can handle the pressure. Keep doing what you do best. Just breathe. He put the phone down, leaning back in his chair. He hadn't been this conflicted in a long time. For the first time, Jamal wasn't sure if the battle was truly over or if it was just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Jamal had to finalize the edits to his paper, answer questions from the journal editors, and prepare himself for the storm of media attention that was slowly starting to gather. A few well-known media outlets had reached out to interview him. His email inbox was flooded with messages from scholars, critics, and even curious students who wanted to know more about his work. But it wasn't just the media buzz that had Jamal on edge. It was the looming presence of Dr. Halstead. The esteemed professor who had dismissed Jamal's work so quickly in the debate had now become something of a ghost in the background. Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that Halstead would not let this go so easily. The older professor had his pride, and Jamal had made it clear that he wasn't going to back down just because the establishment said it was impossible. Jamal's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He glanced up to see Malik standing in the doorway, holding a bag of fast food. You look like you could use a break, Malik said, tossing the bag onto the bed. Let's eat, take a breather. You've been cooped up in here all day. Jamal gave him a tired smile. Thanks, man. Honestly, I don't think I can take a break. There's just so much going on right now. My email's blowing up, I've got interviews lined up, and I haven't even finished going over the journal's revisions yet. Malik raised an eyebrow. And how much sleep have you gotten in the past few days? Not much, Jamal admitted, running a hand through his hair. I've been running on coffee and adrenaline. Well, it's time to stop running for a second. You need to eat and chill out. You can't just go full throttle all the time. Trust me, I've learned the hard way, Malik said with a grin. Jamal chuckled and opened the bag, pulling out a burger. They both sat down, and for a brief moment, the conversation shifted away from the intense pressure of Jamal's work. They talked about everything else, movies, sports, a ridiculous story Malik had heard from a friend. It felt normal again, something Jamal didn't realize he missed so much. But as the minutes passed, the weight of the moment crept back in. Jamal glanced at his phone. Another message from Dr. Ashton. Jamal, I've received the final proofs from the journal. They're about to publish your paper in the next issue. We've also scheduled a conference for next month where you'll be presenting your findings in front of the scientific community. This is your chance to make your mark. Jamal read the message twice, his mind spinning. This was it. The conference. The real deal. He would be presenting in front of the most renowned scientists in the field. The pressure was unbearable. The imposter syndrome threatened to rise up again, whispering that he wasn't good enough, that it had all been a fluke. Malik noticed the change in Jamal's posture. You good, man? I don't know, Jamal admitted, leaning back. This conference. It's a big deal. I've never done anything like this before. What if I mess up? What if I forget everything, or someone finds a flaw in my work that I missed? Malik nodded, understanding the fear all too well. Listen, I get it. But you're not some random kid off the street. You've got something real here. You've proven that. You've already done the impossible. Now, just keep doing your thing. One step at a time. Don't overthink it. Jamal sighed, rubbing his temples. I wish it were that simple. I know, man. But you can do this. And hey, if you need a little boost before the conference, you know I'm here. I'll bring the snacks, you bring the brilliance, Malik added with a grin. Jamal chuckled. Thanks, Malik. You're the best. The next month arrived too quickly. Jamal spent every waking hour preparing for the conference, revising his presentation, practicing his speech in front of the mirror until his voice grew hoarse. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Not when so much was on the line. The day of the conference arrived, and Jamal found himself standing at the front of a crowded auditorium filled with some of the brightest minds in physics. His heart hammered in his chest. He looked down at his notes one last time, checking over the key points of his presentation. He could feel the eyes of the audience on him, their expectations heavy. Dr. Halstead was in the front row, his arms crossed, his gaze as sharp as ever. Jamal swallowed hard, trying to focus. This was his moment. Taking a deep breath, he began. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamal's voice echoed through the auditorium, I stand before you today not just to present a solution to an equation, but to challenge the very notion of what is possible. What we once believed to be impossible is now within our grasp. The room grew silent. Jamal's nerves started to fade as he spoke, his confidence building with every word. As he moved through his presentation, explaining his theory, showing the intricate steps behind his solution, Jamal could feel the audience leaning in. For the first time, he felt like he belonged in this space, not just as a young student trying to prove himself, but as someone who had truly uncovered something groundbreaking. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then came the applause, the kind that left him speechless. Dr. Halstead was still sitting there, but this time, his expression was different. There was no disdain, no dismissive air. For the first time, Jamal saw respect in the older professor's eyes. The impossible equation had been solved. And Jamal Harper had just changed the course of scientific history. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The applause still rang in Jamal's ears as he walked off the stage, his legs a little shaky beneath him. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, the silent hum of admiration and disbelief in the air. His heart was still pounding, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. But as he stepped backstage and into the hallway, the adrenaline slowly started to ebb, leaving a sense of weight in its wake. He had done it. He had stood before some of the world's most renowned scientists and laid out his work. His theory, like a map of uncharted territory. And for the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of responsibility that came with it. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, seeing a message from Dr. Ashton. You did it, Jamal. Absolutely brilliant. I knew you had it in you. But remember, this is just the beginning. You've put your theory out there now. You're going to face even more scrutiny. Keep your head on straight and stay focused. Jamal leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath as the reality of Dr. Ashton's words settled in. Yes, the presentation had gone well, but now came the aftermath, the rigorous testing, the validation, and the inevitable challenges that would follow. It wasn't just about the praise in the moment, it was about whether his work could withstand the fire of scientific rigor. And Jamal knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. He couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Halstead, still sitting in the front row, still watching. He had been one of the fiercest critics of Jamal's work, and while the older professor's posture seemed less dismissive now, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that Halstead was waiting for him to slip, waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting for the flaws in his theory to reveal themselves. And then there were the questions from the audience. They had been polite, but Jamal could feel the skepticism behind their words. What if his theory really wasn't as groundbreaking as he thought? What if there was some glaring hole in his work that no one had noticed yet? He shook his head, pushing the thoughts aside. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He had already faced the worst of it, the moment in the debate when he had been told it was impossible. Now, all that remained was proving that his work wasn't a fluke, wasn't some lucky guess. He had the support of people like Dr. Ashton and Claire, but that wasn't enough. This had to be his proof. The world wasn't going to hand him anything. As he stepped out of the conference hall and into the cool evening air, he found Claire waiting for him outside, a big smile on her face. The way she looked at him, with a mixture of pride and affection, made the nerves in his chest relax just a little. "You did it," she said, walking over and hugging him. "I knew you could, but wow, that was even more impressive than I thought." The room was hanging on every word. Jamal smiled, though his mind was still clouded. "Yeah, but what happens next? Now that it's out there, people are going to start poking holes in it. You saw the way they were looking at me. There's a lot of pressure now." Claire took his hands in hers, her eyes softening with concern. "You can't control how they react, Jamal. You've already done what no one thought you could do. And that's going to shake things up." "I guess so," Jamal muttered, though doubt still lingered. "But now, I need to see if it holds up. If I'm wrong about this, if there's even a small mistake in my calculations, it could all come crashing down." Claire squeezed his hands. "You won't know unless you push forward. Don't second-guess yourself. Trust in what you've done. You've earned this. All those late nights, all those sacrifices. They weren't for nothing." Jamal gave a small nod, her words grounding him, but the uncertainty still gnawed at him. He needed answers. He needed validation from the very people who had doubted him, and he needed it fast. It wasn't just about proving himself anymore, it was about proving that his work was real, that it was the future. The next few days passed in a blur. The emails, the interviews, the follow-up questions from the conference, it was all a lot to process. But amidst the noise, Jamal found time to dig deeper into his theory. He was determined to make sure that there were no loose ends, no weaknesses in his work that could be exploited. Dr. Ashton had already set up a series of meetings with other experts in the field, scientists who were skeptical but open to new ideas. Jamal's task was clear: defend his work, back up every claim, and, most importantly, prove that the solution he had presented was not just plausible but inevitable. One evening, after another long day of revising and preparing, Jamal found himself at the university library, buried in stacks of papers and textbooks. His mind was exhausted, and his eyes burned from hours of staring at the screen. He was getting close to a breakthrough, he could feel it. But there was one more calculation he needed to double-check. One more piece of the puzzle. Suddenly, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw it was from Dr. Ashton. "Jamal," Dr. Ashton's voice crackled through the speaker. "You've got a request for a private meeting with Dr. Halstead. He wants to discuss your theory. I think this is your chance to convince him. To show him that what you've done is no fluke. You ready?" Jamal's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. A chance to go face to face with the one person who had doubted him the most. A chance to show that he wasn't just some kid trying to prove something, he was a force to be reckoned with in the world of science. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Yeah, I'm ready. Tell him I'll be there." The next morning, Jamal arrived at Dr. Halstead's office early, his mind racing. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., and he was determined to make a good impression. He had spent the night revisiting every calculation, every formula, every assumption in his work. If Halstead was going to tear it apart, Jamal was going to be ready. When Dr. Halstead finally appeared, the older professor's expression was unreadable. He gestured for Jamal to sit, and for a moment, the room was silent. "So," Dr. Halstead began, his voice measured and calm, "you've convinced some of your peers. I'll give you that. But you and I both know that the scientific community won't let something like this slip through without a deeper look. You've stirred up quite the storm, young man. Now, let's see if you can weather it. Jamal nodded, swallowing the nervous lump in his throat. This was it. I'm not here to make noise, Professor Halstead, he said, his voice steady. I'm here to prove that this solution isn't just theoretical. It's real. And I'm ready to back it up, piece by piece. The next hour was a battle of wits. Jamal answered every question with precision, every challenge with a calm confidence that surprised even himself. Dr. Halstead was relentless, pushing Jamal to explain every step, every number, every piece of his theory. And with each answer, Jamal grew more and more certain. He had done it. He wasn't just holding his own, he was showing Dr. Halstead that the impossible had been solved. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Halstead sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk. You've done something remarkable, Jamal, he said, his voice quieter now. I still don't fully understand it, but I can't deny the work you've done. You've earned my respect. Jamal's heart swelled with a mix of relief and pride. The impossible equation wasn't impossible anymore. It was real. And with that, Jamal knew, the journey was far from over, but he had already made his mark. The world had just begun to take notice. The days after Jamal's meeting with Dr. Halstead felt like a blur, a whirlwind of praise, criticism, and mounting expectations. His name had spread like wildfire in the scientific community, and with it came both recognition and a flood of challenges. Journalists reached out for interviews, podcasts wanted to feature him, and scholars in the field began to scrutinize his work in more detail than he had ever imagined. But amidst all of the accolades, the pressure only grew heavier. It was late one evening when Jamal found himself back in his dorm room, staring at his laptop screen with the weight of the world pressing down on him. His inbox was full, the messages from professors, journalists, and curious students scrolling endlessly. He hadn't even begun to process everything that had happened over the past few weeks, this whirlwind of success, and now, he was being thrust into a new reality where every word he spoke, every paper he wrote, would be dissected under a magnifying glass. Jamal's phone buzzed on the desk. It was another text from Claire. You good? You've been quiet. I saw your interview with the Times. You crushed it. He smiled at her message, but it didn't feel like the victory it should have. He typed back, his fingers hovering over the keys for a moment. Yeah, I'm good. I don't know. Everything's happening so fast. I feel like I'm drowning in it. He didn't wait for her reply as he stared at the messages on his screen. What was supposed to be a moment of triumph now felt more like an avalanche of responsibility crashing down on him. He had solved the equation. He had proven his theory. But now came the real challenge, living up to the expectations of a world that was watching. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Dr. Ashton. Jamal, Dr. Ashton's voice came through, warm but firm, I just wanted to check in on you. I've seen the coverage, and I know the pressure must be overwhelming. But listen to me carefully, what you've done is monumental. Don't let anyone make you doubt it, least of all yourself. Jamal leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. I'm trying, Dr. Ashton, but it's hard. I feel like I'm on the edge of something great, but also like I'm just a few steps away from falling off a cliff. Dr. Ashton chuckled, his voice kind but reassuring. That's normal, Jamal. You're standing on the precipice of something huge, and it's easy to feel like you could fall at any moment. But you've already proven you can rise above the doubts. You're ready for what's next. You've earned this. Jamal wasn't so sure. The more he thought about the future, the more he felt like the weight of his success was becoming more of a burden than an achievement. The responsibility to not only defend his theory but to expand it, to show that it wasn't just a fluke, was beginning to feel like a constant pressure on his chest. The media didn't help, of course. Their questions had turned from admiration to demand, what's next? What's your next theory? What groundbreaking discovery are you working on now? Jamal didn't have an answer. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was being asked to do the impossible, again. His hands gripped the edge of his desk as the thought settled in, what if I can't live up to this? Dr. Ashton must have sensed the unease in Jamal's silence because he continued, his voice a little softer now. I know you're feeling overwhelmed, but remember this, you don't have to answer to anyone but yourself. You've done what others thought was impossible. That's your victory. You don't need to be the next big thing right now. Take a breath, enjoy this moment, and when you're ready, you'll know what comes next. Jamal didn't reply right away. Instead, he let the weight of Dr. Ashton's words settle over him. Maybe it was okay to just take a step back, to let things settle before he figured out what came next. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. The following week, Jamal was invited to give another lecture, this time at a prestigious university conference, a place where the brightest minds in the field would gather to hear his insights. Jamal had agreed to the lecture, mostly out of a sense of obligation. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he was ready for the spotlight again. The thought of standing in front of an auditorium full of experts, answering their questions, defending his work, it filled him with a level of dread that he couldn't shake. That morning, as he prepared for the lecture, Jamal found himself pacing back and forth in his dorm room. His mind raced through the slides of his presentation, over every equation, every line of reasoning. He was prepared. He had to be. This was his chance to once again prove that his work wasn't just a momentary spark, it was the future of science. But when the moment came, standing at the podium with the eyes of hundreds of people on him, something strange happened. His nerves vanished. The anxiety melted away. As he spoke, explaining his theory in clear, concise terms, Jamal could feel something he hadn't experienced in weeks, a sense of peace. He wasn't doing this for anyone but himself. And that realization made all the difference. By the end of the lecture, Jamal had answered questions with confidence, had navigated the challenging critiques with poise, and had earned the respect of the room once again. The applause that followed was loud, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the applause that made his heart race, it was the realization that he had found his center again. He had reclaimed his purpose. Later that evening, Jamal sat in a quiet corner of the conference hall, looking out the window at the city skyline. The weight of the last few weeks still lingered in his chest, but now, it felt manageable. It wasn't just about the acclaim or the validation anymore. It was about doing what he loved. Solving problems, pushing boundaries, and, most importantly, staying true to himself. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Claire. I just saw your lecture online. You were amazing, Jamal. I'm so proud of you. But I think it's time we finally celebrate, don't you think? Jamal smiled at her message, his heart swelling with gratitude. I think you're right. I owe you a celebration. For the first time in a long while, Jamal felt like he could finally exhale. The storm of expectations hadn't disappeared, but he had found the strength to face it head-on. He wasn't just a kid from the wrong side of town anymore. He was Jamal Harper, a scientist who had solved the impossible equation. And now, with the weight of the world still on his shoulders, he was ready for whatever came next. The days following the lecture passed by quickly, but for Jamal, time seemed to have slowed. Every moment felt like it was stretched thin, filled with the constant hum of thoughts and questions that never seemed to end. People were still talking about his discovery, still praising him for solving a problem that had stumped the brightest minds in the world for decades. But what no one saw, what no one understood, was the internal struggle he was facing. Jamal knew that solving this equation, while monumental, was only the beginning. The world now expected more. They wanted the next breakthrough, the next revelation that would put his name in the history books. And the weight of that expectation threatened to suffocate him. As he sat in his dorm room that evening, the same place he'd sat in months ago, trying to figure out how to begin his journey into the world of science, Jamal felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, doubt. The theory he had proposed, the work he had done, It was all based on something he had seen, something that had clicked in his mind like a puzzle piece falling into place. But now, as he reflected on it, he began to question whether it was enough. Could it stand up to further scrutiny? Would it withstand the test of time? His phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Dr. Ashton. "Jamal, I just got off a call with a few colleagues. We've got a bigger opportunity for you now. This is your chance to push your work even further. I'll send over the details soon. Keep your head in the game. Don't lose focus." Jamal stared at the message, his mind racing. A bigger opportunity? Was that even possible? What did that mean? His eyes darted over the room, taking in the familiar surroundings of his small dorm room. He thought about his mom back home, the pride she felt when she heard about his success. But then there was that sinking feeling, the constant pressure to continue, to prove himself over and over again. Suddenly, a knock at the door broke through his thoughts. He stood up, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape of wood against the floor. "Jamal." Claire's voice came from the other side. He opened the door to find her standing there, a warm smile on her face, though her eyes betrayed concern. "You okay?" she asked, stepping inside. Jamal didn't say anything at first. Instead, he walked over to his desk and slumped into the chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Claire. I feel like I'm in over my head." Claire sat down across from him, watching him carefully. "What's going on?" "It's just, everything," Jamal said, looking at the screen in front of him. "The pressure, the expectations. I solved something that no one thought was possible, but now they want more. They want me to keep going, to make even bigger discoveries. And I don't know if I'm ready for that." Claire's gaze softened. "Jamal, what you did was incredible. You've already done something most people could never even dream of. But that doesn't mean you have to figure it all out right away. You've earned the right to take a breath. Let it all sink in." I know, Jamal said, his voice quiet. "But it's hard. It feels like if I take a step back, I'll lose everything. Everyone will forget about me. I'll just be another name in the history books, a one-hit wonder." Claire shook her head, standing up and walking over to him. "You're not a one-hit wonder, Jamal. You're a pioneer. You've done what people said was impossible. You've earned your place in history. But that doesn't mean you have to figure everything out right now. You've already proven that you can do it. Let that be enough for now." Jamal exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know if I can, Claire. I feel like I'm being asked to carry the weight of the world." She smiled gently, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "I get it. But you don't have to carry it alone. You've got people who believe in you. People who've been with you through this whole journey. You don't have to face the future by yourself." Jamal met her gaze, feeling a flicker of warmth in his chest. She was right, of course. He wasn't alone in this. There were people who supported him, who believed in him when no one else did. He wasn't the same scared kid who had first stepped into that lecture hall all those months ago. He had grown. He had changed. And he had a family, one that wasn't just blood, but the people who cared for him and believed in him when the world told him it wasn't possible. He took a deep breath, finally letting the tension leave his body. "I just need to figure out what comes next. I don't want to disappoint anyone, especially myself." "You won't," Claire said softly. "But remember, you don't have to know all the answers right now. You've done something amazing, Jamal. And when the time is right, you'll know what to do next." The next few days passed in a quiet haze. Jamal continued to work, but it was different now. He wasn't just chasing accolades or trying to prove himself to others, he was rediscovering his love for science, for problem solving, for the journey itself. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to step back, to think without the pressure of the world on his shoulders. Then, the call came. It was Dr. Ashton again, his voice a little more urgent this time. Jamal, I've got some big news. The team at the International Science Coalition wants to fund your next project. They want you to head a team that will take your theory and apply it on a global scale. This is a chance to make a real impact on the world. On things like climate change, renewable energy, and even space exploration. This could be the breakthrough everyone's been waiting for. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. The opportunity was everything he'd dreamed of, everything he'd worked for. But the weight of it also felt like it might crush him. This is huge, Jamal said, his voice shaky. But I don't know if I'm ready for this. It's so much bigger than me. You don't have to do it alone, Dr. Ashton replied. You've got the support of an entire team of scientists, engineers, and thinkers who will back you up. But they need you to lead, Jamal. You have something special. Don't let fear stop you. Jamal stared out the window of his dorm room, the city lights flickering in the distance. Everything he had ever wanted was within his grasp. The opportunity to change the world. The chance to prove that what he had discovered was just the beginning. But even so, he couldn't shake the doubt that still lingered inside him. He didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long while, Jamal felt something else, something powerful, a sense of possibility. Whatever came next, he was ready. Jamal sat in the dimly lit corner of his dorm room, the only sound the faint hum of his laptop. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, the weight of the decision hanging heavily in the air. Dr. Ashton's offer had been a revelation, an invitation to lead a groundbreaking project that could change the course of humanity's future. Climate change, renewable energy, space exploration, all of it now within his reach. The opportunity of a lifetime. Yet, Jamal couldn't shake the anxiety that gnawed at him from the inside. He stared at the screen, where the email from Dr. Ashton was still open, the words offering support and praise. But the weight of responsibility was far heavier than anything he had anticipated. He had always dreamed of making a difference, of being a part of something bigger than himself. But now that it was staring him in the face, he wasn't sure he was ready for it. What if he wasn't enough? What if he failed? Jamal leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. His thoughts spiraled in every direction. On one hand, this was the opportunity to prove to the world that his discovery was more than just a one-time fluke. On the other hand, it felt like stepping into the unknown, a giant leap without knowing what lay at the bottom of the chasm. His phone buzzed. It was Claire again. You still up? I'm guessing you're buried in work. Want to grab dinner tomorrow? I think we both need a break from all this chaos. Jamal stared at the message. A break. That sounded almost impossible. He felt like he couldn't take a step back, not with everything on the line. But maybe she was right. Maybe a brief escape, a moment of normalcy, was exactly what he needed to clear his head. Yeah, I think that sounds good, Jamal replied, finally feeling the weight of the tension lift, if only slightly. Let's do it. Tomorrow night. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. His mind raced. What would he say to Claire? What could he even say? He felt like a child, standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to leap or retreat. The next evening, Jamal met Claire at a small, cozy restaurant downtown. It was the kind of place that felt far removed from the chaos of his life, with dim lighting and soft music playing in the background. Claire was already seated when he arrived, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. She waved him over with a smile, and Jamal could already feel the tension beginning to melt away, just being in her presence. Hey, she said as he sat down. You look like you've been living on coffee and stress. Jamal chuckled, shaking his head. I'm not far off. It's been a lot. The waitress came over and took their orders, and as soon as she left, Claire leaned forward, her expression serious. So, tell me what's going on. You've been distant lately. Jamal hesitated for a moment, then sighed. It's this project Dr. Ashton's offering me. I'm not sure what to do. I mean, it's huge. But at the same time, I'm terrified. What if I fail? What if I'm not cut out for something this big? What if I let everyone down? Claire studied him for a long moment before speaking. Jamal, you've already proven you're capable of doing something extraordinary. What you did with your theory. No one else could have done that. But the thing is, this project isn't just about you. It's about the team, the people who will be there to support you. You're not doing it alone. And more importantly, it's about something bigger than just proving you can do it. This is about changing the world. Jamal nodded slowly, but the doubt still lingered in his chest. But what if I mess it up? What if I make a mistake that sets everything back? Claire smiled softly, her voice gentle but firm. You can't go through life worrying about what could go wrong. You have to trust that you're capable. Trust that you have the right people around you who will help you when things get tough. It's okay to be afraid, Jamal. But don't let that fear stop you from taking a chance. Jamal looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. She was right. This wasn't just about him. It was about something much larger. He had the potential to make a real impact, to be a part of something that could change the future. And he wasn't alone in it. His mind began to shift, the weight of his uncertainty easing, replaced by a sense of clarity. This was the opportunity he had worked for his whole life. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about taking the leap, trusting in himself, and letting the pieces fall where they may. The evening passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and the kind of comfort that only close friends could offer. By the time they finished their dinner, Jamal felt lighter, more at peace with the decision ahead. The next morning, Jamal sat at his desk, staring at the email from Dr. Ashton once again. This time, there was no hesitation in his decision. He clicked reply. Dr. Ashton, I'm in. Let's move forward with the project. I'm ready to take the next step. He hit send, then exhaled deeply. For the first time in days, a weight lifted from his shoulders. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let fear hold him back. As he closed his laptop, Jamal looked out the window at the city below. The world felt a little less heavy now, the possibilities stretching out before him like an open road. It was time to take that first step. A week later, Jamal found himself standing in front of a group of some of the brightest minds in science. The International Science Coalition had gathered in a sleek conference hall, a place where the future of technology and innovation was being shaped. As Jamal prepared to give his first presentation as the lead of the groundbreaking project, he felt a surge of nervous energy rush through him. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was excitement. Dr. Ashton was at his side, offering a reassuring smile. You've got this, Jamal. Jamal nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As the lights dimmed and the crowd fell silent, he stepped forward, ready to take on the challenge. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But Jamal was no longer afraid. He had already overcome the impossible. And now, with a team behind him and the world at his feet, he was ready to change the world. The journey was just beginning. The first few weeks of the project were a blur. Jamal had dived headfirst into his new role, and there was no turning back. The team he was leading was composed of some of the world's most brilliant scientists, engineers, and researchers. They came from all corners of the globe, each bringing their own expertise and unique perspectives. It was humbling, but also overwhelming. Each morning, Jamal found himself waking up earlier than usual, not out of habit, but because the weight of responsibility seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. His email inbox was flooded with questions, reports, and new research that needed his attention. Conference calls stretched for hours, filled with discussions about methodologies, potential roadblocks, and ways to push the project forward. There were times when he felt like he was just trying to keep his head above water. But the part that weighed most heavily on him wasn't the constant barrage of tasks or the technical challenges they faced. It was the quiet moments when Jamal found himself questioning his own ability to lead. He had gone from being a young student with an impossible theory to a leader of a global scientific initiative in the span of months. It wasn't just his own doubts he had to contend with, but also the expectations of others. The people who believed in him, the people who were looking to him for answers. What if he wasn't enough? What if his theory, the one that had seemed so brilliant when he first discovered it, was flawed? The meetings with the team became more frequent, and Jamal could feel the pressure mounting. Everyone looked to him for guidance, but the truth was, he wasn't sure where to go next. There were so many pieces to fit together, so many variables to consider. One wrong move could set everything back, and the stakes were too high to fail. One evening, as Jamal sat alone in his office at the project's headquarters, staring at a whiteboard filled with equations and research notes, Claire's voice echoed in his mind. "You don't have to do it alone, Jamal." She was right. He didn't. But even with the team around him, the weight of leadership was something he hadn't fully prepared for. He'd never imagined himself as a leader, at least not in this way. He had always been the quiet observer, the student who stayed in the background, working on his theories in isolation. Now, he was thrust into the spotlight, with the world watching to see what he would do next. That night, he decided to reach out to Dr. Ashton. If there was anyone who might understand the pressure he was under, it was the man who had believed in him from the start. He grabbed his phone and sent a message. "Dr. Ashton, I need your advice. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. I know this is important, but I'm not sure I'm ready for the responsibility that comes with it. Any words of wisdom?" The response came quickly, as it always did. "Jamal, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. It's normal to feel this way. Leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about making tough decisions, trusting your instincts, and knowing when to lean on your team. They believe in you for a reason. Don't let doubt cloud your vision. You've already done the impossible. Now it's time to keep moving forward." Jamal read the message several times, the words sinking in. Leadership wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about trust. Trusting in himself, and trusting in the people around him. He wasn't alone in this, and he didn't have to carry the burden by himself. The next day, Jamal walked into the conference room with a new sense of clarity. The team was already gathered, waiting for him to lead the meeting. He could see the anticipation in their eyes. They were looking to him, the young prodigy who had solved the impossible equation, to guide them through the next phase of the project. As he stood at the head of the table, he took a deep breath and smiled. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady, though there was still a tinge of nervousness behind it. "I want to start by acknowledging that we're facing a lot of challenges. But I also want to remind you that we're here for a reason. Every single one of you has been handpicked for your expertise, your dedication, and your vision. We're in this together. And together, we'll figure out the best way forward." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Let's take a look at where we are and what needs to be done," he continued. "We've made a lot of progress, but we're not done yet. Our goal is clear. We're solving problems that have never been solved before, and that means we need to be innovative, resourceful, and unafraid to take risks." Jamal glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of each of his team members. He saw the trust in their gazes, the same trust that Dr. Ashton had spoken about. It wasn't just about his brilliance anymore. It was about his ability to bring out the best in those around him. He could do this. The meeting went smoothly, with the team presenting updates and brainstorming solutions. There were challenges, of course, but each obstacle was met with determination and optimism. Jamal felt himself growing more confident as the hours passed. He wasn't just the kid who had cracked an impossible theory anymore. He was the leader of something much bigger, something that could change the world. And he wasn't doing it alone. By the time the meeting ended, Jamal was exhausted, but it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from knowing you've moved one step closer to your goal. As the team filed out of the conference room, Jamal stayed behind, looking over the notes from the meeting. He felt a sense of pride, not just for what they had accomplished, but for how far he had come. In that moment, Jamal realized that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about knowing when to ask the right questions, when to trust the expertise of others, and when to step up and make the tough calls. It was about finding the balance between self-doubt and confidence, between humility and assertiveness. And most importantly, it was about knowing that, together, they could achieve the impossible. As Jamal walked out of the building later that evening, the sky above him was tinged with the colors of sunset. The city stretched out before him, alive with possibilities. He still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The weight of leadership no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a challenge, one that Jamal was ready to meet head-on. The days blurred together, one long stretch of meetings, calculations, and brainstorming sessions. Jamal had settled into his role as the leader of the project, but it wasn't without its challenges. The weight of the decision-making rested heavily on his shoulders, but he had learned to trust his instincts and the team around him. The breakthroughs and setbacks came in waves, sometimes exhilarating, sometimes frustrating, but Jamal had found a rhythm. Yet, despite the progress, something nagged at him. An undercurrent of unease that he couldn't quite place. It wasn't the project itself, the science was sound, the team was brilliant, and the vision was clear. It was something deeper. Something outside of his control. One day, as Jamal walked into the headquarters, he was met with an unusual sight. A small group of journalists had gathered outside the building, their cameras clicking and lenses trained on the entrance. Jamal paused for a moment, watching them from the corner of his eye as he entered the lobby. It was the first time he had seen reporters outside the building in months. There had been some media attention when he had first taken on the project, but things had quieted down. Now, it seemed, the story was back in the spotlight. Inside, Dr. Ashton was waiting for him in the conference room. His expression was serious, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a subtle tension. "Jamal, we need to talk," Dr. Ashton said, his voice low. "The media is catching wind of the project again. There's growing interest in what we're doing, and while that's a good thing, it's also a dangerous thing." Jamal's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Dr. Ashton looked around the room, as if ensuring no one else was listening. "There are people who don't want us to succeed, Jamal. Powerful people. And they're starting to pay attention. You've heard the rumors, right? About corporate interests, government entities, groups who are invested in maintaining the status quo. Our work threatens their profits, their power, their control. They won't let us push forward without a fight." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. He had suspected that the stakes were higher than he had originally realized, but hearing it from Dr. Ashton made it all the more real. "So, what do we do? How do we protect the project from these forces?" Dr. Ashton leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "We continue with the work, of course. But we have to be more careful. There are forces working behind the scenes, trying to discredit us, sabotage our progress. It's not just the science that's at stake now, it's our safety. And the safety of everyone involved." Jamal's mind raced. He had spent so much time focused on the technical challenges and the vision for the future that he hadn't considered the external forces that might try to derail their progress. The people who would stop at nothing to maintain control, to keep things as they were, to keep the world in the dark about the changes they could bring. "I won't let them win," Jamal said, his voice firm. "We've come too far." Dr. Ashton nodded slowly. "I know. But we need to be prepared. This project is bigger than all of us. We have to protect it from the unseen forces that will try to take it down." The weeks that followed were tense. Jamal could feel the pressure building on all sides. The team continued their work, but there was an underlying tension that couldn't be ignored. Dr. Ashton's warnings about outside forces seemed to have been right. There were rumors swirling, whispers about corporate espionage, government interference, and shadowy figures trying to stop their progress. Jamal had hoped it was just paranoia, but the increasing number of strange phone calls, the sudden drop in funding, and the quiet sabotage of their resources made him realize just how deep the stakes went. One afternoon, as Jamal sat at his desk going over the latest research data, his phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Jamal, I think you need to see this. Turn on the news." Curious, Jamal opened his laptop and clicked on the live stream of a major news network. The headline flashed across the screen: "Controversial project by young scientist facing backlash from powerful interests." He watched as the anchor spoke about the growing controversy surrounding the project. They mentioned the potential environmental and economic impact of the new technology, and how certain unnamed, powerful entities were calling into question the feasibility and safety of the research. The segment was filled with thinly veiled accusations, insinuations, and attacks on Jamal's character. It was clear that someone was trying to paint him and the project in a negative light. But who? Jamal's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about science anymore. This was personal. He quickly texted Claire back. "What's going on?" Her reply came almost immediately. "I've been hearing rumors from some of the staff. People who are worried about the media fallout, the pressure from outside groups. I think you need to take a step back and reassess. This is bigger than we thought." Jamal closed his laptop and sat back in his chair. The weight of everything seemed to crush him in that moment. It wasn't just the project, the science, or the discovery. It was his life that was under attack now. People were willing to go to great lengths to prevent this from happening, and they would stop at nothing to see him fail. But Jamal couldn't back down. He wouldn't. He had worked too hard for this, and the stakes were too high to give in now. He had a choice to make. He could retreat into the shadows and let the forces against him win, or he could fight back, take control of his own destiny, and protect everything he had worked for. He wasn't about to let fear dictate his actions. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and press conferences. Jamal and Dr. Ashton worked tirelessly to defend the integrity of the project. They reached out to supportive allies in the media, countered the misinformation with facts, and made their case to the public. The project was too important to be derailed by unfounded accusations. But the battle was far from over. Each day, there was a new challenge, a new attack from the unseen forces trying to tear them down. And yet, despite it all, Jamal felt something inside him shift. He was no longer the uncertain, hesitant young scientist. He had grown into a leader, one who was ready to face whatever came his way. With every challenge, Jamal's resolve grew stronger. He wasn't just fighting for the project anymore. He was fighting for the future. And he would not let anyone take that away from him. The battle was just beginning. The chaos of the past weeks had left Jamal on edge. He was no stranger to pressure, but this was something different. The weight of the world seemed to press down on his shoulders, and the uncertainty of the future hung like a dark cloud over every decision he made. The project was at a crossroads, every move he made was scrutinized, every word he spoke dissected. And yet, despite the relentless obstacles, Jamal knew he couldn't back down. He wouldn't. One evening, as the sun began to set over the city, Jamal found himself in a quiet corner of the lab, poring over a stack of research notes. The room was empty except for the hum of machines and the soft clink of his pen as he took notes. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the next phase of the project, but no matter how hard he tried, there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. The outside forces, the pressure from powerful interests, had taken its toll, and it was starting to affect the team. They were all running on fumes, stretched thin by the constant demands of the project and the pressure of the external attacks. The door to the lab creaked open, and Claire walked in, her expression weary but determined. "Jamal, we need to talk." Jamal looked up, relieved to see her. He had been running on empty for so long, and the presence of someone he trusted felt like a lifeline. "What's going on?" Claire took a seat across from him, folding her arms. "I've been hearing from the team. Morale's starting to dip. People are feeling the heat, and some of them are questioning if it's worth it. The media's attack is taking its toll, and some of the funding we relied on has been pulled. We're losing support, Jamal." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know. It feels like we're fighting on all fronts. But we can't afford to back down. We've come too far to let this slip through our fingers now." Claire nodded but didn't say anything for a moment. She let the silence hang in the air before speaking again. "I know you're doing everything you can. But you're not in this alone. You can't do it all by yourself." Jamal met her gaze, feeling a pang of guilt. He had always been the one to shoulder the responsibility, to lead with unwavering determination. But perhaps Claire was right. Maybe he had been too focused on keeping everything together on his own, too afraid to ask for help when it was most needed. "I know," Jamal said softly. "But I'm just not sure who to trust anymore. The people behind the attacks are everywhere, and they're ruthless. It feels like no matter what we do, they're one step ahead." Claire leaned forward, her voice steady. "Then we fight back. Not with fear or hesitation, but with everything we've got. If we let them win, if we let them silence us, then everything we've worked for will be for nothing. This project is bigger than all of us. It's about changing the world, Jamal. And sometimes, changing the world comes with a price." Jamal took a deep breath, her words sinking in. He had known this from the beginning, of course. But hearing it from Claire, someone he respected and trusted, made the weight of it all feel real in a way it hadn't before. "We need to rally the team," Jamal said, his voice firmer now. "We need to remind them why we're here, why this matters. We can't let fear and uncertainty rule us. We have to stay united." Claire smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "That's the Jamal I know." The two of them spent the next few hours strategizing. Jamal knew they couldn't just continue with business as usual. They needed to act decisively, to turn the tide in their favor. They would organize a press conference, a chance to address the attacks head-on and show the world that they weren't backing down. Jamal would speak, not just as a scientist, but as a leader who was ready to fight for what he believed in. It was time to take control of the narrative. The day of the press conference arrived, and Jamal felt a familiar knot in his stomach. The tension was palpable, the stakes higher than ever. As he stood backstage, preparing to step into the spotlight, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was on the line. The cameras were waiting, the world was watching, and he had to be ready. Claire was by his side, offering her quiet support. "You've got this," she said, her voice calm but reassuring. Jamal nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure if he believed it. The weight of the responsibility was heavy, but it wasn't just the world that he had to convince. It was his team, his colleagues, the people who had put their faith in him. He couldn't let them down. When it was finally his turn to speak, Jamal stepped out onto the stage. The lights were blinding, and the room was filled with the hum of camera equipment. The press corps was seated in front of him, all eyes on him, waiting for his first words. Jamal took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He saw the faces of journalists, some skeptical, some eager for a story. But he didn't let it faze him. He had a job to do. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "The project we are working on is about more than just science. It's about hope. It's about progress. It's about the future. We have worked tirelessly to bring this vision to life, and we are not backing down." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "There are those who will try to stop us," he continued, his voice growing stronger. There are forces out there who are afraid of the change we are bringing, afraid of the power of this new technology. But we will not be silenced. We will not be intimidated. We are here to change the world, and nothing will stop us. The room was silent for a moment. Jamal could feel the tension in the air, the weight of every word. But then, something shifted. He saw a few journalists nodding in agreement, their expressions softening. He had their attention. "We are not alone in this," Jamal said, his gaze now focused on the team members who had gathered behind him. "This is a team effort. We are united in our mission to make a difference. And we will succeed, no matter the obstacles in our way." As Jamal spoke, he could feel the energy in the room change. The reporters seemed to hang on every word, their skepticism slowly giving way to respect. The tide was turning. The battle was far from over, but Jamal knew they had taken the first step in the right direction. After the press conference, as Jamal left the stage, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a start. The world had heard them, and now, they would watch to see what came next. The real fight, Jamal knew, was just beginning. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready. The turning point had come, and he was determined to see it through. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Despite the success of the press conference, Jamal knew that the real battle was still ahead. The world was watching now, and every move they made would be scrutinized. The forces opposed to their project were not going to give up without a fight. If anything, they would only intensify their efforts to sabotage everything Jamal and his team had worked for. Jamal's phone never stopped ringing. Calls came in from news outlets, government officials, and investors, many of them skeptical, some supportive, but all wanting something. Each one seemed to have a different agenda, and the constant barrage of questions, demands, and proposals left Jamal feeling more overwhelmed than ever. He needed to keep his focus, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to do so. One evening, after another round of meetings, Jamal retreated to his apartment to unwind. He needed a break, even if just for a few hours. He plopped onto the couch, running his hands through his hair, his mind racing. He had always been good at compartmentalizing, at pushing forward despite obstacles. But this was different. The stakes were higher now, and he couldn't help but wonder if they were still in control of their own destiny. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. This time, it was Claire. "Jamal, we need to talk. There's something you need to know." Jamal's stomach tightened. He could hear the urgency in her message, even without her saying a word. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. He knew whatever it wasn't good. When he arrived at Claire's office, she was already waiting for him. Her face was pale, her expression tight. It wasn't the kind of reaction he was used to seeing from her. Claire was always the rock, the steady presence who kept things in perspective. But tonight, she looked like she had just received devastating news. "Claire, what's going on?" Jamal asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Claire motioned for him to sit down. As he did, she slid a folder across the table toward him. "I don't know how else to say this, Jamal. It's worse than we thought." Jamal opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was a series of confidential reports, each one outlining the extent of the opposition they were facing. Powerful lobbying groups, government agencies, and private corporations, some of the biggest names in the world, were working together to stop them. The documents outlined the tactics they planned to use: smear campaigns, financial sabotage, and even attempts to discredit the science behind the project. The notes included disturbing mentions of threats to Jamal and his team, suggesting that no one was safe if they didn't fall in line. Jamal's hand trembled slightly as he closed the folder. The weight of the reality before him was crushing. These weren't just abstract threats anymore, they were real. And they were coming for him, for his team, for everything they had built. "This is bigger than I thought," Jamal muttered, his voice barely audible. Claire nodded grimly. They've got resources, connections, and influence. They'll do anything to stop this project from succeeding. We knew it wasn't going to be easy, but this is beyond what we expected. Jamal stood up abruptly, pacing the small office as he tried to process everything. The fear, the pressure, the weight of the responsibility, it was almost too much to bear. But then, as always, he reminded himself why they were doing this. They were on the verge of something revolutionary, something that could change the world. They couldn't let this kind of opposition stop them now. How do we fight back? Jamal asked, his voice steely. Claire's eyes met his, a flicker of hope in them despite the dire situation. We keep moving forward. We need to strengthen our public relations, get our supporters to rally behind us. We need to show the world that we won't be intimidated. But most importantly, we need to make sure the science keeps progressing. As long as we can show that what we're doing is real, that it's not just theory, we'll have the upper hand. Jamal nodded, his mind already working through the next steps. We'll need to reach out to our allies, lawyers, public figures, anyone who can help us push back. We can't let them silence us. Claire agreed. And we need to stay ahead of the media. We need to control the narrative before they do. It's not just about defending ourselves anymore, it's about taking the fight to them. As Jamal left Claire's office, the weight of the challenge ahead felt heavier than ever. The opposition was ruthless, but he couldn't back down. They were in the final stretch, and they needed to keep pushing forward. There was no turning back now. The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings, press briefings, and legal consultations. Jamal and Claire worked tirelessly, reaching out to every ally they could find. People who had the resources, the influence, or the knowledge to help them fight back. It was an uphill battle, but Jamal was used to fighting. It wasn't the first time he had been told something was impossible. Every day brought a new twist. One morning, an anonymous email arrived in Jamal's inbox with an encrypted attachment. It was a message from someone claiming to be on the inside of one of the opposition groups. The email contained disturbing intel about how the group planned to escalate their efforts, smear tactics, false reports, even threats against the team's personal safety. The sender claimed to have evidence that could expose the conspiracy, but only if Jamal was willing to take a huge risk. Jamal stared at the email for a long time, weighing the risks and rewards. This could be the breakthrough they needed, the key to exposing the people who had been trying to sabotage everything. But it was a gamble. There was no telling who was behind the email, or whether the information was legitimate. After a long pause, Jamal made his decision. He forwarded the email to Claire. We need to find out if this is real. We can't let them keep pulling the strings behind the scenes. Claire's response came quickly, I'm on it. We'll figure this out. The hours that followed were filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. They worked with their trusted legal team to trace the source of the email, while also preparing to release more information about the project's progress to the public. If the conspiracy was real, they needed to be ready to expose it. But even as they worked, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was only getting stronger. The threats, the attacks, the pressure, it was all intensifying. He had never felt so close to the edge. As the sun began to set on yet another long day, Jamal looked out the window of his office, his gaze lost in thought. The road ahead was uncertain, the risks were high, but one thing was clear, they were in the fight of their lives. And Jamal was ready to face whatever came next. The days following the discovery of the anonymous email blurred into one continuous stretch of tension and anticipation. Jamal's every move felt like a high-wire act, balancing between the precariousness of the project's success and the threat of everything falling apart. The storm was not just a metaphor anymore. It was real. It was coming, and it was threatening to consume everything they had worked for. Claire, as always, was by his side, but even she seemed to carry the weight of the world. Their meetings were endless. Every conversation, every decision carried the potential to make or break everything. Despite their efforts to stay one step ahead, the opposition had proven to be more formidable than anyone had expected. The attacks had come from every direction: media smear campaigns, online trolls, and even public calls for investigations into their research. But there was still hope. The legal team had traced the email to a source within one of the opposition groups. It was a breakthrough, but it also made Jamal feel more exposed than ever. Whoever had sent the message had risked a lot to reveal what was going on behind the scenes. But would it be enough to turn the tide? One evening, after another round of intense meetings, Jamal found himself alone in the quiet of his office. The weight of the decisions ahead was almost too much to bear. The city outside his window seemed distant, almost irrelevant in comparison to the fight unfolding inside. Jamal was exhausted. But he couldn't afford to rest. Not now. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire. "Jamal, we've got a lead. We need to move quickly." Without a second thought, Jamal grabbed his coat and headed out the door. Claire's message was a spark of urgency. Something had happened. Something was shifting. When he arrived at the safe house where Claire and their legal team had been working, he was met by Claire, her expression a mixture of resolve and anticipation. The room was filled with activity, phones ringing, people scrambling over paperwork, and the hum of computers in the background. There was a sense of controlled chaos, but Jamal could tell they were getting close. "Jamal," Claire said, her voice low but urgent, "we have it. The smoking gun." She handed him a thick folder, and as Jamal flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowed. What he saw was a series of damning documents, contracts, emails, and covert communications, all linking powerful figures to a plan to not only stop their project but to destroy anyone who stood in their way. The conspiracy was even more extensive than they had imagined. There were names in these documents that Jamal had only heard of in passing, but now they were here, tied to the very forces that had tried to undermine their work. "This is it," Jamal said quietly, his mind racing. "This is the proof we need." Claire nodded. "Exactly. But we have to be careful. If this gets out, it'll be a war. We're not just fighting for the project anymore, we're fighting for our lives." Jamal looked at the documents again, his hand trembling slightly. He could feel the weight of everything hanging in the balance. If they went public with this information, it could bring down some of the most powerful people in the world. But the alternative was letting them continue to manipulate the narrative, to destroy everything they had worked for. There was no easy decision. "Do we release it?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but laced with tension. "We can't wait any longer," Claire replied. "The longer we wait, the more they have time to cover their tracks. We release it now, before they can spin it in their favor." Jamal nodded, steeling himself for what was about to come. It was now or never. They immediately contacted their trusted media contacts, people they knew would help them get the story out in a controlled manner. The last thing they needed was for this to get buried under a tidal wave of disinformation. With the documents in hand, the plan was clear: they would release the information directly to the public, giving the world a glimpse into the conspiracy against them. But even as they prepared to make their move, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling in his gut. This was it. This was the point of no return. Once the documents were out there would be no turning back. They would be at war. The next morning, the story broke. News outlets around the world flashed headlines, and social media erupted. The documents were legitimate, and they implicated some of the most powerful corporations, politicians, and lobbyists in the world. The truth was out, and Jamal's team was no longer just a group of scientists, they were warriors in the fight for truth. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some news outlets were skeptical, attempting to downplay the findings or discredit the documents. Others, however, took a different approach, fully backing Jamal's team and calling for investigations into the conspiracy. As the story spread, public support grew. The tides had turned. People were beginning to see the bigger picture. This was no longer just a scientific project, it was a battle for justice, for the future, and for the truth. But the opposition didn't go down without a fight. Almost immediately, they mobilized, launching counterattacks aimed at discrediting the findings, questioning the authenticity of the documents, and calling for further investigations into Jamal's team. The pressure was overwhelming. It seemed like every time they took a step forward, they were met with an equal, if not stronger, pushback. Despite the growing chaos, Jamal held firm. They had the truth on their side, and he knew that as long as they stayed focused and united, they could weather this storm. It wasn't going to be easy, but they had come too far to back down now. As the days turned into weeks, the battle raged on. The opposition threw everything they had at Jamal's team, lawsuits, smear campaigns, and even threats against their safety. But Jamal refused to waver. The truth was on their side, and no amount of intimidation could stop them. The turning point came when a powerful whistleblower from within one of the opposition groups came forward, corroborating the documents Jamal's team had released. This final piece of evidence shattered the opposition's credibility, and public opinion began to swing in Jamal's favor. Investigations were launched, and the people responsible for the conspiracy were finally exposed. In the end, the truth prevailed. The project moved forward, and the world began to recognize the monumental impact it would have on society. Jamal had done the impossible, not just by succeeding where others had failed, but by exposing the corruption that had tried to stop them. As he stood in front of his team, looking out over the faces of those who had fought beside him, Jamal realized that the battle wasn't just about science, it was about the power of truth and the unwavering strength of a team united for a common cause. They had won, but more importantly, they had changed the world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?